right, this is Marty Owings, and I'm here with the Mayor of Minneapolis, Betsy Hodges. Welcome. Thanks for coming today.
Thank you so much for having me on.
All right. Well, thanks for making time out of your schedule. I know it's busy. We were just talking about, hey, you have to be a mayor and campaign simultaneously. Yes. What's that been like?
Well, the work doesn't stop. There's been, as always, a lot going on in Minneapolis, a lot of really amazing things. We're growing, we're doing well, and we've had some really difficult challenges. The crime hasn't stopped, and difficulties haven't stopped, but we're meeting our challenges with our strength. But I've had to continue being mayor all day, every day, at the same time that I campaign.
Well, let's talk about the campaign a little bit so far. So, I mean, how's it going in general, and what are you seeing when you talk to people, residents? What are they saying are their key issues in the race?
Campaigning's going really well. My litmus test for me is always, how are the conversations with voters going? I've always run grassroots campaigns and have done that very successfully. And so those conversations are going well, and what I find is all across the city, people really have similar concerns to one another, even across what people might see as differences and divides. People want really good quality of life for themselves and their families, and especially for their kids. And so the concerns people have are what they see having an impact on that. Questions about safety in the streets, whether that be pedestrian safety or crime. Questions about education, job availability, job creation. What is the vision for the future? Are my kids included in that vision of the future? And underlying all of that, the people of Minneapolis really concerned about the fact that we have some of the biggest gaps between white people and people of color of any city in the country. And we're an extraordinary and amazing city. And one of the joys of mayor is getting to tell people that and explore that with people and lift ourselves up for the great city that we are. At the same time, we have those challenges that if we don't meet them well, our future is very dim.
How does your message change, for instance, if you're in a boardroom at like maybe Target or you're in a rec center in North Minneapolis? What types of messages are you trying to deliver in those two forums that might contrast?
Excuse me. Actually, what I say in the boardroom doesn't change much from what I say in the rec room. People might have different focus areas or areas of interest, but one of the things people find is that I am remarkably consistent, that what I say is what I mean, and I mean what I say. Yeah. And that distinguishes me from some of my opponents. It distinguishes me, I think, in politics. But I've been a person in sobriety since I was 19 years old. I have a lot at stake if I can't wake up every morning and look myself in the eye, a lot more than a job or public service. And so I do my best to be clear with people where I stand. It's great and people find it helpful, but it also means I have taken some stands people don't like. I get pushback for some of the stands that I have taken, but you always know where you stand with me. I have opponents who will say anything to anybody to get a vote, or I'll say one thing here and the opposite thing there just to try and curry favor. And at some point you have to take a stand. At some point you have to make a decision. And that's much harder to do, and you make a lot of enemies when you've tried to be all things to everybody.
Well, you brought it up. Let's talk a little bit about that. So, there's some policing issues in Minneapolis, and the St. Paul mayor struggles as well with some of these, and the police union is very strong. Mm-hmm. What would you do, Mayor, to try to maybe reform that? I mean, you've hired a different chief. That's for one thing, but the policing issue, it's a big one. It's on a lot of people's minds. Anything different in your next term?
Well, the lessons that I've learned and the changes I've made or make, I do it along the way. I'm not waiting for my second term to do anything differently. The horizon for policing in Minneapolis, I think Chief Arredondo is really suited to lead. He understands that now the walls of City Hall, the walls of the police department actually need to come down and be permeable. He not only is out in the community himself, he's of the community himself. He wants to bring the community in to the police department, to have more say and and to shine a light on how do we do training, what are our policies, how can those change, what citizen input can he take, and that is one of his strengths as a leader. You know, and you know that I'm committed to those changes because my entire time as mayor, and even before I was mayor, I was working diligently day by day on policing issues. And I stand by this statement, there is not a mayor in this country, and therefore not a city in this country, that has done more, invested more rapidly in transforming how we do policing than I have done and Minneapolis has done in the last 4 years. We have changed policy, we have changed training, we are part of the national initiative for building community trust and justice. We are hiring people who reflect the communities they serve. Every officer who responds to 911 calls is wearing a body-worn camera. I've proposed that every sworn officer wear a body-worn camera at Chief Arredondo's request. He asked for that as one of the 2 things he asked for when he came on, budget-wise. And all of that is adding up to the right foundation to chart a new course for Minneapolis and policing and community trust and that relationship with the community. And culture change takes 5 years, 7 years, 10 years, and we're at about year 4 or 5. But we have all the building blocks in place, and there's more to be done. I am not saying there isn't more to be done, and Chief Arredondo is a great partner to do it.
What about critics who say it's too little too late and body cameras aren't going to work if they're not turned on? And I mean, to that you can respond as well, but the Civilian Review Board, things like that could really put some teeth in that. Are you considering changes there, or, you know, and what about the criticisms that it's too little too late?
The best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago. The second best time is today. I immediately, when I became mayor, continued the work, but I had a better platform to do the work of making sure we were headed toward 21st century policing and away from 20th century policing. And I've been doing that work consistently, even before Jamar Clark was shot, before Justine Damond was shot. I was doing that work, the chief was doing that work, and I should say those were tragic deaths that really highlighted some of the challenges, activated and motivated people to advocate even more firmly for what they wanted, and it created space for me to actually make those changes more swiftly than I would have been able to do otherwise. There's a 7-person, essentially a ruling majority on the city council that is not always in favor of this direction in policing, and I've had to swim upwards against that river as mayor, and still we've been able to do some of the most progressive work in the country. So I would say that. As for body cameras, Chief Arredondo, one of the first things he did was change that policy. And the numbers before the policy change and after are like night and day. That the use of body cameras has already gone up over 300% in terms of hours filmed, officers using them. We trained all our supervisors, so the inspectors, lieutenants, and the sergeants, on how to manage to the body cam policy to make sure that they're keeping track of whether or not people are using their body cameras. So absolutely, it's a fallible tool. They need to be used, but they've already been helpful in the department and will make them more effective as time goes on. And what people forget is that they've only been on the ground about 9 or 10 months. Right? We haven't even had a full year of full implementation of body cameras. And so, you know, as we're seeing issues, we're correcting them, but they are a strong tool that have worked well in other communities, but they are a tool. They're not going to solve all the problems.
Yeah, absolutely. Some of your opponents have talked about and criticized you and the current administration for some of the things that happened around Jamar Clark, obviously, and Justine Damond, and the response there. Particularly one issue is putting 2 rookie cops on night patrol. That's almost unheard of in cities unless you're seriously short-staffed. How do you address that? I know you're not the police chief. You had a police chief, you fired the police chief. Some say it was too late, but now you are the CEO in a sense of the city. The buck stops at Betsy Hodges' desk. Yes. How do you respond to those criticisms?
You know, we need everybody to be safe.
And are you getting tired responding to the criticisms?
It's part of democracy that I talk about the job that I'm doing and let people know what I've been up to. And it is important that everybody in Minneapolis is safe and feels safe in their neighborhoods, and feels safe and is safe calling the police. And so the issues that we're facing regarding policing and police community trust are not unique to Minneapolis, that we have seen all across the country. The advocacy work that's being done, the demonstrating, the use of First Amendment rights around these issues, and it's working and it's helping because it's shining a light on the issue and it's creating space for leaders like me who choose to make change to actually do it in the face of what would otherwise be significant resistance. And so that's been really, really important. But the couple things that I would say about that are, first, I have responded to these challenges, to these tragedies, by doing everything in my power to do the work that needs doing to improve community trust and to accelerate the pace of that work. The policy changes. Every officer has had procedural justice training, implicit bias training, crisis intervention training. We are, moving to, I've made the investment, there are 27 more police officers now than there were when I started. I've continued to invest in policing so that we can do community policing. So officers don't have to go from call to call to call. And this time last year, there were officers had walked 569 beats. This time this year, they've walked almost 6,000. Those are the sorts of changes that have happened since I've become mayor. And you mentioned the Civilian Review Authority. Yeah. When I was council member, I fought hard for our Civilian Review Authority, the power that it had at the time, which was unique, that they had the ability legally to have independent findings of fact, which in the last few years, the union went to the legislature, was effective in changing the law that made that possible. At that point, we needed to come up with a new way of doing civilian review in Minneapolis. We had the OPCR. I didn't vote for that as council member. I didn't think there was enough civilian representation. But we've also been giving them time to show what they can do and show their work, and I know Chief Arredondo is committed to working with them well. And I put money in the budget this year for another civilian investigator. When somebody makes a complaint about police misconduct, they can go and they can ask, either a police officer or a civilian investigator will review. And we're finding most people ask for a civilian investigator to review their case, so I've invested in more civilian investigators.
Well, and I'm not trying to in any way deflect responsibility here, but it may sound a little bit like it, but I have to ask you these questions. What can you do as a mayor if the court system is not going to hold police accountable, if the police union is strong enough to put an officer that the police chief fires back on the street the next day? What can be done by the mayor to affect change in those areas?
One of the things, it's really important that we, as leaders, can really use the tools we have to create the best police force possible, the best workforce possible, and we're using all of those tools. It is true that traditionally, for example, if the chief were to fire someone for cause, the union would grieve it. The arbitrators typically would say, yes, you should have your job back, and people return to the department, and we have to deal with that situation. One of the benefits of having been so clear about what our standards and expectations are, every officer knows they've had to sign a sheet of paper saying this is what our expectations are. One of the benefits of changing policy, making clear what those policy changes are, and training to those policy changes, is that when we do fire somebody for cause, which we don't like to do, but sometimes you have to, when we do fire somebody for cause, it's harder for the arbitrator to say, well, if there's less gray area, it's harder for the arbitrator to say you need to take this person back. So I'm not saying we're winning all our arbitrations, but we're winning far more than we used to. And that is a sign of progress. That's one of the things that I've been able to do, is work with the chief to say, we have to be absolutely clear about what our expectations are. We have to supervise and manage to those expectations in ways that are crystal clear to our officers. And we're also praise where praise is due. We have so many officers going out there every day, working their hearts out, really doing their best to be guardians. And Chief Arredondo's vision is of guardians and not warriors, and he's looking at our training to that effect. But when we do have circumstances where somebody's just in the wrong career, we have more tools at our disposal to make sure that they find another path.
Very good. Let's talk a little bit about transparency in government, and especially in city government. particularly as it relates to like Super Bowl negotiations and the freedom zones around the new stadium and stuff. Where are you at on like, pushing back a little bit? And do community members, businesses, what kind of pressure does a mayor get in those situations to like suspend the First Amendment within a mile of the stadium and things like that? I know that might be a little bit of hyperbole, but actually, in actual fact, you can't like carry a sign or protest within certain number of feet of the stadium or even a mile or something.
The first thing I would want to say is that the biggest threat to our First Amendment rights right now is the President of the United States. And in the most recent budget that I put together, I invested in things that will strengthen the First Amendment. He doesn't want media reporting. He wants to cast doubt on news and have fake news seem like real news. He doesn't want artists creating art. He doesn't want demonstrators demonstrating. He doesn't want voters voting. And so in this budget that I proposed for 2018, I have significant investments for our data practices to make them so media can get access to the information they've asked for more swiftly. We've had a bad history with that, and I want us to move forward, so I made investments in that. Investments in voting, so we can have everybody who can vote should vote, and making that more possible and more accessible for people. Sure. Investments in the arts at a time when they are such a crucial voice for people, and symbolically, and in effect, the President of the United States doesn't want artists creating art. So the First Amendment is.
Did you read my Facebook page?
I did not.
I'm. Okay, go
But I gave an entire speech in April called One Minneapolis in the Time of Trump, and I laid all this out. Within 12 hours, Jared Kushner's newspaper, The Observer, had called me one of the worst mayors in the country. We put out a press release. For those who don't know, that is Donald Trump's son-in-law's newspaper. Right. And I was very proud to be on a list with Bill de Blasio as one of the worst mayors in the country.
Another mayor, yeah. Big city mayor.
And so when it comes to the Super Bowl, a lot of what people talk about is just what city services are going to be provided. Can we provide them well? It is our job. How much is a
taxpayer on the hook for? Like those types of things that people want transparency.
Yes, and we have been doing our best to get that information out there. The expectations for Super Bowl costs are in my budget. I've been clear about that. But we'll also be getting reimbursed from the host committee of the Super Bowl for just millions and millions of dollars of city services provided there. And so doing my best to be transparent about that. Yeah.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit about, let's go back to that for a second before we switch gears. So, the NFL has all these rules regarding this freedom zone, they call it. Mm-hmm. How can you push back on that and still hope to host the Super Bowl? Apparently, it's kind of the same type of hostage, situation that you had with the stadium. You build it or we'll leave, or you don't do this for us and we'll suspend the Constitution and we won't have a Super Bowl.
It's one of the places where, the laws of the land allows, and the decisions of Supreme Courts have allowed certain leeway for private enterprise and for personal property rights, and sometimes those are at odds with First Amendment rights. And and we as a city are stuck in the middle of that tension, and I understand it. My commitment is for people to be able to express their First Amendment rights peaceably, lawfully, peaceably and lawfully, and we have moved our department to be able to facilitate that to the best of our ability.
It just crosses the line if it goes past the property that First Bank has, and the Vikings, and goes out in the middle of the city. That's a different matter. But let's talk about sanctuary city issues. You mentioned the president and some of his activities with respect to ICE. His activities, but let's talk about it with respect to the immigration enforcement and what's going on in Minneapolis right now. Where do you stand on that?
Yeah. Well, as I said, all of our residents need to be able to feel safe and be safe calling the police. And we've had a separation ordinance in place in Minneapolis since 2003. What that means is no city employee, including our police officers, are to ask people about their document status because it is irrelevant to whether or not they will be provided city services. Mm-hmm. And we've had that firewall in place since 2003. Donald Trump wants local law enforcement to be a local arm of ICE, and we will not do that. And I will say no. And he has threatened lots of costs to cities who hold firm, and we still say no. And I know that I have 420,000 Minneapolitans standing with me when I say that. You know, our neighbors are at stake, our First Amendment is at stake, and public safety is at stake. Because if you think you're going to get deported for calling the police, even if you're a victim of crime or a witness to crime, you're not going to call the police. You're not going to talk to the police, and that reduces safety for everybody in the city. And so I've, you know, invested this year dollars to help support the work of people who are supporting our immigrant neighbors. And then for 2018, I've proposed the creation of the Office of Immigrant and Refugee Affairs in Minneapolis, so we can really centralize that work of support, have a place to fund that work, and seek more funding from other folks so we can uplift our neighbors at a time when they are under so much attack and so much siege.
Well, right. So let's back up a little bit to the, let's go back to the Justine Diamond thing. Why haven't we heard anything more about the police officer who was involved, or more from his partner? Why isn't there more transparency there, and can we expect to see more soon?
Well, first I will say one of the new things instituted since I've been mayor is that for officer-involved shootings, critical incidents like that, when one of our officers shoots somebody, we ask somebody else, an outside investigator, to investigate. So my understanding is that and it's been in the newspaper because I'm not part of it, but that the results of the investigation are now in the county attorney's hands, and he will decide whether or not to prosecute the officer for shooting Justine Diamond, which, again, was just tragic for the community, tragic for the world. My heart goes out to her family, and it just rocked the police department, and everybody is just awful. But as for the transparency piece, that officer has the same Fifth Amendment rights everybody has. He is not required to give testimony, no one can or should compel somebody to give testimony. That's also a constitutional right that we all have. Would I like him to speak on the record? Yes, I would. But I can't, nor would I compel him to speak on the record, because that would violate his Fifth Amendments. Right.
Well, there's certain investigation, forensic stuff, things that went on around the shooting, and that stuff hasn't been made public either. And I don't think there was any body cams in play at the time, right?
Again, the investigation is being conducted by someone else, and so those would be questions for the BCA about when and how they'll release information, although now it's in County Attorney Freeman's hands. But yes, tragically, those body cameras were not on. From what I know, which is limited to what the information has been released. From what I know, those cameras should have been on, and it was a violation of policy as it existed then that they weren't on. But it's certainly a violation of policy as it exists now.
All right. I think that's as close to an answer as we're going to get from you on that one.
But the reason I don't have more of an answer for you is because it's not my investigation.
Well,
and it's not the city of Minneapolis's investigation.
But they're City of Minneapolis employees, the officers.
They are, but due process has to follow. Like, we have to follow due process, and so we can't make decisions about what happened until the criminal case is done. And then the city asks the question about the employee-related questions. We ask after the criminal case has concluded itself, either if he's not charged or if he is charged and it goes through a trial. Our role as a city doesn't come in until after all of that has played out. I'm not trying to abdicate my responsibility, but I am trying to follow the law and the process that we have here in the country.
Yeah, I just can't help thinking some things transcend the laws of man and paperwork and bureaucracy. At some point, there's a family out there that's, which I understand you're sympathetic to, but
which I have, and I've been in touch with the family and had more than one conversation. But the flip side is you want that investigation to be without a shadow of a doubt. If I tried to involve myself in that investigation or step out ahead of it, it could create doubts about the outcome, whatever it is, of whatever happens on the legal end of things, and nobody wants that either.
No, I'm just looking for the time, that the mayor's sitting at her desk and she decides, hey, if I can help move this thing along in any way, shape, or form, make a phone call, pull some strings with people that I know. And by pulling strings, I mean the kind of strings that get pulled when a mayor says, hey, we need to know this. The public has a business.
I'm going to tell you, though,
Yeah.
you don't want the mayor in an independent investigation trying to pull the strings of that independent investigation. It's the reason people asked for one.
Mm-hmm.
The city should not be involved in this investigation, including the mayor.
Right.
Because I like to think I'm really great, but you don't know who's going to be mayor in 15 years, in 20 years, in 30 years. You don't know how they would pull those strings in that moment.
I don't mean strings as in illegal strings. I mean, what could you do as the mayor with the power that you have?
Well, what I can do, but
along?
what I can do with the power that I have is make sure that we are doing the strongest policing possible,
Right.
to make sure that we have a police force that is about building community trust and not violating it, to make sure that all of our systems are in place to make that true and increasingly true over time. That's the role that I play as mayor. To involve myself in this investigation would go against the reason we asked for the independent investigation to begin with.
I got you. I get that you're tough, Mayor. I get it. I just wonder sometimes if there's a part of you there that, that wonders if you could do more. It's a tough situation because you're almost in a reactionary mode after these things happen. It's a zero-sum game. How do you, other than comfort the family and try to make things move along with the power that you have
Right.
legally, as a human being, what can you do beyond that? It's a tough spot to be in, I get it.
Somebody asked me today at another event, what is the toughest thing about being mayor? And it's like when someone is killed in the city, whether it be by a police officer's hand or another resident's hand or whatever it is. And I am as heartbroken as anybody by that. And that's where I have to have the fortitude to know that I get to have those feelings as a normal human being, but I'm also the mayor in that moment. And the question isn't how I feel. The question is, what does the city need?
Mm-hmm.
And I do my best to answer that question.
Yeah. So you've had this time in office now. You've been in the city council. You're criticizing Trump like somebody who might be interested in a different office, but let's just say this is the one that's most important to you.
It is incumbent on every American who values our Constitution and every American who values our neighbors, our immigrant neighbors, our Muslim neighbors, women, people of color, people with disabilities. It is incumbent on all of us to resist the policies of Donald Trump and to do our best to move our country forward in a way that is about uplifting people and not tearing them down. Yeah. That would be true whether I was in City Hall or not in City Hall. And that isn't about, I have tools as mayor that I use, right? And what tools did we want the mayor of Dusseldorf to use in 1933? I do my best to use those tools now because it's that consequential a threat to our democracy. I believe he is that consequential a threat to our democracy because I see him using the levers of his position to try and centralize authority in himself. When he objects to the content of athletes who are exercising their First Amendment rights and objects to the fact that they're using their First Amendment rights, but he doesn't object to the content of Nazis and white supremacists who are exercising their First Amendment rights and doesn't decry their content. That tells us everything we needed to know about the President of the United States. And I think everybody has the right to exercise their First Amendment rights, but we get to agree or disagree about the content of that. Yeah. So I just wanted to push back a little bit there on the Trump thing.
Understood. So Mayor, let's just, is it okay if I just say Betsy for now because I'm trying to get beyond the mayor part right now? Okay. Is this all right? Yep. So you've got this political experience. We mentioned it, but at the end of the day, you're Betsy Hodges. You've got a lot of different experiences in life beyond that. You are in a mixed race, interracial marriage. You've got issues that you have to face that bring you in a keenly different space than the average white lady who's, a mayor.
Yes.
If there is that.
There aren't many of us. Right. There aren't many lady mayors to begin with, but yes, right. I bring some things with me to City Hall every day. Sure.
Yeah. When you get behind those things, what is it in your heart that is driving you to want to go through this again? You know, you've had some rough times as mayor. There's no question about it. Your city's experienced some tragedies, obviously, and some good things as well. But what is it past the talking points beyond the, you know, the mayoral campaign? What is it that motivates you? Why do you want to run? Why do you want to be mayor again? Yeah, inside.
You know, I get the chance every day to help make people's lives better. I mean, Paul Wellstone said that politics is about the improvement of people's lives. And every day I get an opportunity to do that. And when I can...
So what about that, though, excites you? What makes you happy?
Well, I was about to say. So, you know, there have been opportunities for me to, for example, sit down with young men who I know are actively involved in violence in one way or another through groups, and get to, you know, we're doing it's called GVI, Group Violence Intervention, and the county attorney and the police chief and the U.S. attorney and I, along with community members who've been impacted by violence and men who've been in groups and gangs who are now not, and we get to sit down with these young men and say, you know, I get to say to them, I love you too much to have a casket or a jail cell be your next stop. Here's what we can offer you if you want to get your life on a different path. And so a lot of men are taking us up on that offer, right? It's called Group Violence Intervention. Now, the flip side of that is the consequence of their behavior is violence, and violence is unacceptable, completely unacceptable in our community. And so if someone in your group commits a homicide, then we are going to do everything legally we can to take on not just the person who did the shooting, but the people who are involved in that group as well, and please take that message back. And that's an extraordinarily powerful thing to do, is to be able to say, you know, I love you and I value you and you're important to us. You're very vulnerable. You're likely to be shot if not shooting someone else. Mm-hmm. And we can help you make your life different and better. And that erases a lot of the hassles. You know, when or when we create this park downtown, the Downtown Commons, I spent 2 years fundraising for it. It was a theory, and the first day that I could put my feet in the grass and know that my efforts helped make this real, this great thing for downtown and for the people of Minneapolis and the people who come here, that makes a lot of the other stuff just fade away in those moments. You can actually do really good things. And I said at the beginning, the litmus test for me is the conversations with voters, and they are going really well. If all you do is pay attention to social media, you know, or certain moneyed interests that have their own echo chamber, you get a very different picture of what Minneapolis voters think than you get if you're actually out there talking to them day in and day out. That community trust and building that community trust is important just as human beings, and it's also important for public safety. And I said a little bit earlier some of the things that are on the horizon, things that Chief Arredondo wants to do and is already doing, building those relationships with the community. When I sat down with him about the budget, he asked for two things: body cameras on every sworn officer and community liaisons, people who can be in precincts, who can be that liaison between the community and the department to make the boundary between community and police more permeable and maybe even disappear. And that builds on, you know, we have a sanctity of life policy that is now everybody goes home safe at the end of the day, after decades in every department in the country of it being officers go home safe at the end of the day. We have a duty to intervene and a duty to report policy. If you are an officer and you see another officer misbehaving, it is your duty to intervene and report explicitly. And we're training people to that, and if you don't do it, you're in trouble yourself. Mm-hmm. We're hiring officers who look like and the communities that they're representing. You know, investing in our community service officer classes, which is the best ladder in people of color and women into the department that we have. And yes, a focus on community policings. We measure positive police contacts now. Not just negative ones like arrests. And this year they're up 53%. over the time that we started keeping track of those. Those are the building blocks, but we have a leader in Chief Arredondo who has been very clear that the trust has been broken and the trust needs to be rebuilt. And that's one of the reasons I'm so proud to have put his name forward for appointment. But what I will say to that is all of that is dependent on one of the great things that we have is a community that is also doing its work, advocacy, being there, making suggestions, that law enforcement and community aren't two separate things, that public safety depends on law enforcement and community coming together. Was I disturbed? It's, I've at that point, I've had experience with advocates and demonstrators coming in to voice what they would like to see. I was certainly surprised to see people there, but I don't know that disturbed is the word that I would use. It's it has its effect. It's meant to be disruptive. It's meant to take me aback. It's meant to be a little startling or a lot startling, and it was all of those things. But I could also hear, what people were saying. My offer still stands to sit down and talk with anybody who wants to ask and have a conversation about policing. And so I made sure to let people have some time, and then we adjourned, and then I came back and finished answering journalist questions.
Good. We're going to wrap up with a final question for you, Mayor. You've got a number of pretty qualified and well-spoken competition in the mayor's race. Which of those people do you see, if you should be mayor, do you see as they have ideas or they have capabilities that you would like to invite into your administration? In other words, your competitors now might be part of your cabinet later, or I don't call it a cabinet now, do they? But
there are a lot of great folks who are running for mayor. We disagree about certain things, but we agree about others. And I would say, Ray Dean is an architect, and so he has some really great ideas about the built infrastructure in the city that, he and I have already had more conversations about. So there are examples like that, certainly, being able to work together with people and take the best ideas from wherever they come.
Who do you think right now is your leading competition?
I'm going to let the voters decide who the leading competition is.
That's a way too easy, Mayor. Come on, there must be somebody in the race that you think, that person, if I weren't mayor, that person might win, if they were.
I have a couple of candidates. There are a couple of candidates who are running who are very well funded. They have the backing of the downtown business interests and are very well funded. And so that's certainly always a concern. I would say I've never won with the most money in any of my races. I've always won. I will be clear on that because I focus on grassroots campaigning, actually having conversations with people about what matters to them.
All right, you've been gracious. Thank you for your time, and we
so
appreciate
much.
you visiting with us today, Mayor. And this is Mayor Hodges running for mayor again, and
Thank you.
Second term, and yeah.
And I ask for everybody's first choice vote on November 7th.
All right, yeah. See that the whole opportunity culminates in just that one ask. You have to do that because if you forget to do it, then you're remiss in your duties. That's all right. Thanks, Mayor. I appreciate your time. This has been Marty Owings with Mayor Betsy Hodges. So long for now.